So in 2025, I read a total of 101 books, not including books that I did not finish. That was books that I read cover to cover. And out of those, there were 12 one-star reads. So about 12% of the books that I read ended up giving them 1 stars. I differentiated between absolutely 1 star reads and 1.5 stars if they had some sort of redeeming quality for me. But overall, these were books that I did not enjoy, did not like reading, didn't think they made an impact, were difficult. A lot of different reasons why books were in here. So, to go over the books, I decided to rank them in terms of how many reviews they already had and sort of gauge off that how popular they were. So, if the books were less popular, it would be less of a, divisive opinion. Um, so let's start with the books that I did not finish. The first book was a book called Say Hello to My Little Friend by Janine Capo-Crusette. This book takes place in Miami. It talks about the story of a young boy who is very impressionable. He has watched Scarface, and now he is inspired by the Scarface story to start his own empire. There were often references to Scarface, the movie. For me, the book was kind of hard to get into. The writing felt a little bit weird. Things were described in an abnormal fashion, for me at least. Things were kind of trippy, but not in a cool way, more kind of like a weird kind of way. Overall, I didn't think it was a bad book. It kind of reminded me of The Wonderful Life of Oscar Wilde in a way. But that book kind of made me feel connected to the characters, whereas here I didn't feel much connection with the characters at all. And just for reference, Say Hello to My Little Friend has an average rating of 3.69 stars, so pretty good rating, but only 1,004 reviews, so pretty low in terms of numbers of reviews. The next book that I DNF'd is a pretty popular read. A lot of people rate this novel very highly. I didn't think it was a bad book, but it required a lot more attention than I was willing to give it at the time. I got like 50% of the way through this book, and I was like, I have no idea who the main characters are. I have no idea what's going on in this book. I read half this book, but I have no idea what's going on here. And that book is Blood Meridian, or Evening Redness in the West by Cormac McCarthy. It has an average rating of 4.15 and about 218,000 ratings. I just found it difficult to focus with this book. The way that the story is told is like, I think it's linear, but it's not like clear what's going on. It's kind of more of a lot of descriptions rather than like telling a story, if that makes sense. So just due to the difficulty of this novel, the difficulty that I had with reading it, I DNF'd it. I think I'm definitely going to try to go back to this book at some point. But I'm going to need to take it a little slower and focus a lot more when I'm reading this book next time. Okay, so the bottom 8 books of the year. 8 books I gave 1 star, so that means 4, I believe, I gave 1.5 stars. But these are books that I gave 1 star, didn't like them, wouldn't recommend them, kind of just bad, you know? All right, the first one is actually an audiobook that I listened to. This one was free on Audible, and of course that word free, they'll get you every time. They'll give you a bunch of garbage. The book was called Bloodcast by Shailashri Shankar, and it told a murder mystery set in India. Now that is a combination that I have enjoyed before, especially by the author Abir Mukherjee. He wrote some fantastic books, and I love those books. But this one just did not work for me. I only ended up listening to it because it was free, that doesn't mean that all good things are free. It only has 151 ratings and an average rating of 3.5 stars. And Blood Castle Cast is definitely a book that I would not recommend. The next book that made my naughty list this year is Web of the Romulans by M.S. Murdoch. This is one of the entries in the Star Trek series, the Star Trek original series. It has 1,500 reviews and an average rating of 3.5, so some people really did enjoy this. For me, it kind of felt like less of a story and more like two poorly written plot lines. In the book, the computer falls in love with Kirk, and the Romulans are threatening the Federation. There's not much to like really in this installment, and it's not worth the trouble of reading through it to get to the payoff of the conclusion. It just felt like it was kind of poorly written, poorly designed, poorly executed. Not a great winning combination when you're talking about a book. So Web of Romulans is my next 1-star read. The next 1-star read is also a Star Trek book. I do like the Star Trek original series. This one is The Wounded Sky by Diane Duane. Average rating of 3.8 over 2.3 thousand reviews. This book was less of a poor execution and just a mash of things that didn't work for me personally. It hit on all levels with things that don't click with me, and if it had tried to be less of a book for me, I don't think it could have achieved that goal. I think this was absolutely all the things I hate in a book. It involves Kirk and his crew along with a huge spider, which is strike number one, because spiders, no go, don't take place in my story, don't want them near me, don't want them in my life. Second is they try to use new equipment, and it's impossible to explain how the new equipment works. Strike two, can't be using stuff that, you can't even make up. It works. How does it work? Oh, I have no idea. It just works. Two, nope, can't work with that. And three is an omnipotent being trying to explain the meaning of life. Strike three. This book is relaxing. It's supposed to be chill. It's not supposed to try and answer life's biggest questions. That's not what Star Trek is for. It's kind of like a lighthearted adventure. So instead of being lighthearted, it kind of took this book and made it a difficult experience where they were trying to preach rather than tell a story. And overall, for me, when I read this, I thought this was the weakest Star Trek entry in the series up to that point. And I think it's difficult to express how much I didn't like this book. This book probably a 0 star. If I'm being honest, if I could, 0 stars for this book. The next book was a combination between H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds and Sherlock Holmes. It was a combination between those two in The Further Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Manly Wade Wellman. This one is a pretty highly reviewed 4.28 stars over 4,000 ratings. Pretty well liked, but it just didn't click for me. Before reading this book, I reread The War of the Worlds to kind of get into that mindset of what's going on in that book. And this kind of felt like a bad parody of the two combination stories put together. It had elements of Sherlock Holmes along with Professor Challenger, also from the same author. And combine that with H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. It showed promise and concept, but for me, the execution was kind of poor. The execution was boring, character interactions, especially the development of a romance between Miss Hudson and Sherlock. Come on, that's not needed. It's not helpful. We all know Sherlock only had eyes for one woman, so Irene Adler, how are you bringing Miss Hudson into this? I didn't like that. And there was few twists in the story itself. Um, but unlike the H.G. Wells story, which was new, innovative, and attention grabbing, this one kind of felt like a weak parody of the two. So that's my next 1 star. The next 1 star was another Cormac McCarthy read. The first one I DNF'd, but this one I got all the way through and I just said, nope, this one not for me. This one was Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. Average rating of 3.82 from 54,800 reviews. And what to say about this book? It kind of focuses on a man that's turned to a life of crime after being accused of rape. The main character is despicable. He's kind of a absolute menace to society. He doesn't take rules seriously. He doesn't have any concern for anybody's well-being other than himself. He is a serial killer, and McCarthy describes his acts in grotesque and descriptive detail. I just didn't enjoy this book. I thought it was kind of vulgar and didn't do anything for me at all. It just made me feel kind of grimy. So for that, I gave it 1 star. The book itself, maybe a great insight into what their psychology is of people who commit these kinds of acts. For me, reading for enjoyment, didn't enjoy this. 1 star, easy. The next book is probably the most popular out of all of these so far. And this one was The Iliad, with a new translation by Emily Wilson. The Iliad, written by Homer, is an epic poem that has been passed down for generations, usually through the oral tradition. It's a poem that's broken into 24 different books. The stories focus on the Trojan War, its heroes, heroines, and gods that intervene in their lives. What I tried to do with this one is I tried to listen to the audiobook, thinking that since it's an oral tradition book, it would be better in audio form than to read this. But I had difficulty with the narrator. Like, it was difficult for me to focus on what's going on, to understand where the jumps were. Maybe I didn't have enough background on Greek mythology. But for me, this book was kind of just difficult to understand, difficult to get into, difficult to pay attention. Therefore, I gave it 1 star. I think it's probably a rewarding endeavor to read this book, but for me, I guess I lack the knowledge needed to appreciate this. It was difficult for me to follow along with what was happening. It was difficult for me to stay engaged while listening to this book. Overall, it was just a bad experience for me. That doesn't mean I'm not gonna try to read this book again. I was thinking about trying to read The Odyssey. Maybe that one will click a bit more for me. But this book, I had to give 1 star to. And the average rating on this one is 3.93 over 506,000 reviews. A book that's even more popular than The Iliad, that I gave 1 star to, is kind of a divisive book. So this one might surprise less people. But this one is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This is a satirical novel written in 1961, and it tells the story of a young man who's in the army in Italy who flies bomber jets during the war. It relates, the title of the book, Catch-22, relates to the paradox that grounding a pilot for insanity can only happen once they request to be grounded, but once they do that, it means that they're sound of mind, that they no longer want to fight, and therefore they are sent back into combat. This book kind of is a crazy satirical novel. It plays fun at everything. They often find themselves in weird and unlikely circumstances. maybe when this book came out, it was more revolutionary, but I found it to be forgettable. The premise of the book itself was absurd and kind of overdone, in my opinion. Um, Heller himself in 1994 said that for every lover of this book, there is a critic. And I think I sit on the critics wall where this book just didn't do it for me. I didn't enjoy the experience of reading it. I didn't think it was funny. I didn't enjoy the questions that Heller was asking of the reader that he was trying to get them to answer. Overall, this book was just a miss for me. I just didn't vibe with this one at all. And then to move on to the 1.5 star books. This is another 4. The first one here is by the Strugatsky brothers. This is a science fiction novel about a man who travels to another planet where they're stuck in the Middle Ages. This was released in 1964 under the USSR. There was some interesting historical context within this book that talked about how difficult it was for the Strugatsky brothers to release what they wanted to release under the USSR government. The story itself starts with a few friends on a trip in the woods, and then it seems that the characters are telling a story of this guy called Don Ramada, who is from Earth but has traveled to a different planet that is still living in the Middle Ages. And he finds himself trying to observe these humans on this planet while trying to also fit in with them. And overall, I found that the plot was kind of weak. There was little going on, like little happening within the book. Therefore, it was kind of hard to keep my attention. I found it kind of uninteresting. Maybe I lacked the historical knowledge again of the Middle Ages or of the USSR to kind of make this book a bit more enjoyable. But I didn't click with this book. It didn't work for me. Some of the other Strugatsky books are better for me, at least in my opinion. But this one didn't click. Hard to Be a God, not for me. It had an average rating of 4.12 over 18,000 reviews, so pretty highly rated. The next one I gave 1.5 stars to is a James Bond book. Now, Ian Fleming writes some pretty interesting books. They're always, I'd say, victims to the time they were written in. They contain things that by today's standards are kind of like frowned upon. But I read Diamonds Are Forever, which is the 4th installment in the original James Bond series. It tells a story of how Bond is sent to investigate the American cartel that is smuggling in diamonds from Africa. And he visits New York, Las Vegas, among other locations, as he tries to uncover the mob, win over yet another woman, and kill some of the members of the cartel that would like to find him dead. Unlike some of the other entries that I thought had either interesting plots or interesting characters or a villain that you love to hate, this one felt kind of bland and boring. It didn't contain any of those elements, and this is definitely one that I will not be rereading. And actually, I think if you're reading Ian Fleming, this one might be just worth a skip. It's not that great. Average rating was 3.64 and 25,000 reviews on that one. The next 1.5 star that I gave is probably one that people might get upset about. This one is the complete short stories of Ernest Hemingway, the Finica Vigia edition. This is one of the more complete short story collections. The average rating on this one is 4.29 and about 38,000 reviews, but I only gave it 1.5 stars. This is the collection of all the short stories that he wrote over his entire life. It covers a wide range of topics, wide range of scenarios, some about war, some about Journeys Across America. There's a lot of things that Ernest Hemingway touches upon in these short stories. Here, I think better than ever on display is Ernest Hemingway's interest in a wide range of topics and places. Um, some stories are like one page, literally one page, while others are like 50 pages. So there's a wide variety of length here too and development of the characters. Um, but for me, when I read a short story, I like it to have some kind of like unique twist at the end, or some kind of reveal, or something that packs a punch at the end of the story. And none of these really had that. There were a couple exceptions. The short Happy Life of Francis Macomber was one that I thought was really good. Really enjoyed that one. But the rest of them kind of left me disappointed. They kind of seem to lack a premise or like subject of interest in most of these stories. And they didn't feel like great representations of the short story narrative. So therefore, I didn't really vibe with these stories, and I gave them 1.5 stars. Perhaps I'm in the minority here, but this collection was not something that I really enjoyed. Um, but he won a Nobel Prize, so maybe he knows more than I do. And then the next book is, again, a divisive book. This one is one that people either love or hate. It's been banned in a number of schools just because it's kind of difficult. And this is Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. An average rating of 3.8, over 3.9 million reviews. So a lot of people have read this one. And this one's a hotly debated book. It's often removed from classrooms and schools due to the nature of the novel. And it feels like an ongoing flow of consciousness from a teenage boy who is coming to grips with himself and those around him. The way that he sees the world is in absolutes. So he sees any deviation from his perceived idea of somebody as being a phony. He's a character who is difficult to like, hard to despise, and yet difficult to understand why he causes a mix of emotional responses across people. The story itself revolves around Holden being kicked out of school and going on a short adventure trip to New York City before returning home. He's coming to terms with grief. He's dealing with his own issues in a way that I think teenagers do sometimes. I think that's what resonates with a lot of people with this book, is that it tells a story that they feel is their own. It connects with them on that personal level. But I found this character to be difficult to like. His way of looking at things in absolutes is a very rudimentary kind of approach to understanding other people. It feels like the book's trying to say something about becoming stagnant and malleable to conform to society as we grow up. But it doesn't do it in a way that is kind of like positive. It kind of uses negativity and bringing people down in order to prove its points. And I kind of don't agree that you need to show the bad to reveal the good. Therefore, I mean, I thought it was an interesting premise, interesting execution. The plot kind of non-existent. I didn't enjoy the character, and also like the story of J.D. Salinger himself and his crazy backstory drew away from this book as well. So this is the last book that I gave 1.5 stars to, was Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And those were the books that I gave 1 star and 1.5 star to. Once again, to list them, was Bloodcast, Wounded Sky, Child of God, Web of Romulans, The Iliad, Catch-22, The Further Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, War of the Worlds. 1.5 stars, Diamonds Are Forever, Hard to Be a God, The Complete Stories of Ernest Hemingway, and Catcher in the Rye. So those were the books that I didn't enjoy. Oh, there's one more book. There's one more book that I gave 1 stars to. This one is pretty well received as well. I think it won the Booker Award. But this one is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. This book, what can I say about this book? This book has an average rating of 3.75 and 174,000 reviews. It focuses on the story of Abraham Lincoln's youngest son who dies. The premise revolves around his son's death at a young age, and he finds himself in a place between life and death, in like a purgatory. It's told in a really kind of weird way, with multiple narrations. It was difficult to read. It was difficult to understand who was talking. The premise didn't appeal to me. I didn't enjoy the story. This one was just another complete miss for me. I wasn't engaged. I disliked the narrative style. I didn't feel any affinity for any of the characters. Therefore, I gave it 1 stars as well. So those were the 8 1-star reads and the 4 1.5 star reads. Overall, a couple of these, I think, decent books. Didn't click for me. Still decent. Some people might enjoy them. Some of them, absolutely, nobody should read these books. Didn't like them. Thought they were a waste of time.